I have a question before I begin, and I want you to close your eyes for just a second and think about this. When was the last time you raised your voice at a child? Maybe it was this morning. Maybe it was last week. Maybe it's something you've been carrying quietly, something that replays in your mind late at night when the house is finally still and you're lying there wondering, did I damage something today? Did I hurt them in a way I can't see? If that question just landed somewhere deep in your chest, stay with me. Because what I'm going to share with you today is going to completely change the way you understand what's happening inside your child's mind, not just in the moment you raise your voice, but for years afterward. And I promise you, by the end of this, you won't feel shame. You'll feel something far more powerful than that. You'll feel clarity. And with clarity comes the ability to actually change things. Let me start with a child named Marcus. Marcus was 7 years old, bright kid, the kind of kid who could memorize the names of every dinosaur by age 4 and who would stop in the middle of a busy sidewalk just to watch an ant carry something 3 times its size. His teacher called him curious. His grandmother called him a gift. But at home, Marcus had started doing something that was driving his parents to the edge of their patience. He had started lying. Small lies at first, then bigger ones. He'd lie about homework, about what he ate for lunch, about whether he'd brushed his teeth. His parents couldn't understand it. They were good people. They loved Marcus deeply. But they were also exhausted, stressed, and stretched thin the way most parents are. And when Marcus lied, his father would lose it. Not violently. Not in any way that anyone would point to and say that's wrong. Just a voice raised sharply. A tone that cut through the air like cold metal. Why do you keep doing this? How many times do I have to tell you? And Marcus would go very, very quiet. His parents thought the quietness meant he understood, that the message had landed, that maybe this time things would change. They didn't understand what the quietness actually meant. And that's what I want to talk about today. Because what was happening inside Marcus's brain in those moments, in those seconds when his father's voice rose and the room changed, wasn't learning. It wasn't reflection. It wasn't even guilt. It was something far more primal, far more physiological, and far more significant than most parents ever realize. Here is something that modern neuroscience has shown us that should genuinely stop us in our tracks. When a child is yelled at, their brain doesn't process it as a lesson. It processes it as a threat. And the brain's response to threat is not thoughtful. It is not rational. It doesn't say, "Oh, I understand now, I'll do better." The brain's response to threat is survival, pure ancient biological survival. The amygdala, that small almond-shaped structure sitting deep in the emotional core of the brain, fires immediately. It floods the body with stress hormones, cortisol, adrenaline. The whole system shifts into fight, flight, or freeze. And here's the part that most people don't know. Here's the part that changed everything for me as a child psychologist. When a child is in that state, the prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain responsible for reasoning, for understanding consequences, for empathy, for actually processing the lesson you're trying to teach, goes almost completely offline. Let me say that again, because it matters so much. When you are yelling at your child, the very part of their brain you need to reach to teach them something is the part that shuts down. You are not talking to your child's thinking brain, you are talking to their survival brain. And their survival brain does not care about homework. It does not care about lying or tidiness or respect. It cares about one thing only. How do I make this scary feeling stop? For some children, the answer to that question is to go very still, to become invisible. That was Marcus. He went quiet not because he understood, but because stillness was the safest thing he could do in that moment. For other children, the answer is to fight back, to escalate, to scream right back or slam a door or say something cutting and cruel. And then parents get even more frustrated because it looks like defiance, it looks like disrespect, when really it is a terrified nervous system trying to protect itself. And for other children still, The answer is to flee, emotionally, if not physically, to dissociate, to look at you with that blank, glassy expression that feels so infuriating because it looks like they don't care. But they do care. Oh, they care enormously. They have just learned that caring hurts too much, so they've gotten very good at disappearing inside themselves. Now, here's where this gets even more significant, and I need you to really stay with me here, because what I'm about to tell you is one of the most important things I will share today. The brain is plastic. We use that word in neuroscience, neuroplasticity, to mean that the brain can change, reshape, rewire itself based on experience. This is a beautiful, hopeful truth when it comes to healing and learning and growth. But it cuts both ways. Because repeated experiences don't just teach the brain, they structurally alter it. Studies in developmental neuroscience, including landmark research from Harvard Center on the Developing Child, have shown us that chronic exposure to stress, including the stress of frequent yelling, emotional volatility, and unpredictable anger in the home, physically changes the architecture of a developing brain. The neural pathways that connect emotion to response, the circuits that govern fear and threat detection, they get strengthened, reinforced. They become highways in a brain that was meant to have quiet country roads. What this means in real life is that children who are frequently yelled at begin to develop brains that are, quite literally, wired for hypervigilance. They become exquisitely sensitive to tone of voice, to facial expressions, to the sound of a door closing or the change in energy when an adult enters the room. Their nervous systems are always scanning, always watching, always preparing. And the tragedy of this? The thing that breaks my heart when I work with families is that parents often mistake this hypervigilance for something else. They see a child who flinches at raised voices and think the child is being dramatic. They see a child who reads the room constantly and think the child is manipulative. They see a child who can't focus on schoolwork because their nervous system is in a state of low-grade alertness and think the child just doesn't care about learning. They don't realize they are watching a brain that has reorganized itself around protection. Let me tell you about the research of Dr. Martin Teicher at Harvard Medical School. His work, and it is stunning, genuinely stunning, showed that verbal aggression from parents is actually associated with changes in the white matter connections between brain regions, the very infrastructure of how different parts of the brain talk to each other. He found that children exposed to high levels of parental verbal aggression showed alterations in pathways related to language processing, self-regulatory functions, and emotional regulation. Think about what that means. Language. The very tool we use to teach children, to connect with them, to tell them we love them, is processed differently in a brain that has been shaped by harsh voices. The love gets filtered through a system that was built to be afraid. And what I'm about to share next is going to completely shift the way you see the cycle that so many families get trapped in. Because here's the thing about a child with a hypervigilant, fear-adapted brain. They become harder to parent. Not because they are bad, not because they don't love you, but because their behavior, the lying, the defiance, the emotional explosions, the withdrawal, is driven by a nervous system that is operating in protection mode almost all the time. And what do parents naturally do when a child's behavior escalates? They raise their voices. And what does that do to the child's brain? It confirms the threat. It deepens the wiring. It makes the behavior worse over time. And the cycle tightens. And nobody wins. And everyone is exhausted and confused and hurting. This is not a cycle that makes anyone a bad person. Not the parents, not the child. It is a cycle that makes everyone human, people doing the best they can with the tools they have and the brain they were given, which was shaped by how they were parented, which was shaped by how their parents were parented. Because here's the pattern interrupt that I want to offer you right now. Something that changes everything when you really sit with it. Most parents who yell were yelled at. Not all, but most. And when they were children, lying very still or screaming back or disappearing into themselves, they made a silent promise to themselves. I will never be like that. I will be different. I will be better for my children. And they meant every word of that promise. They still do. But the brain doesn't learn from intentions. The brain learns from patterns. And the patterns we absorbed as children, the stress responses, the emotional circuits, the way we learn to handle overwhelm, those patterns come with us into adulthood, into parenthood, into the moments when we are tired and stretched and a child does something for the 15th time and something in us just snaps. That snap is not a character flaw. It is a nervous system response. It is your brain doing exactly what it was wired to do decades ago, in a small child's bedroom, in a house where raised voices meant danger. And here is the hope in that, the profound, life-changing hope. If it was learned, it can be unlearned. If it was wired, it can be rewired. Not easily, not overnight, but genuinely, truly, sustainably rewired. Let's come back to Marcus for a moment. When Marcus's parents came to understand what I've just shared with you, when they actually saw the science, when it stopped being abstract and became real, when they understood that their son's quietness was not compliance but terror, that his lying wasn't defiance but a desperate attempt by a nervous system to avoid unpredictable danger, something shifted. I remember his mother sitting across from me with tears moving quietly down her face. She said, "I thought the silence meant he wasn't affected. I thought if he didn't cry, it was fine." She paused. "He was protecting us, wasn't he? He was hiding how scared he was so we wouldn't feel bad." And she was right. That is exactly what children do. They protect the adults they love. They absorb. They adapt. They become whatever shape the environment requires of them, because they are utterly dependent on the adults in their world, and their little brains know, at a deep, wordless, biological level, that displeasing those adults is genuinely dangerous. A child's brain does not know the difference between "my parent is raising their voice because they're stressed" and "I am in danger." The amygdala doesn't do nuance, it just fires. Now I want to talk about something that doesn't get discussed enough in parenting conversations, and that is the accumulation effect. We tend to think about yelling as individual events. I lost it once this week, but that's not a big deal. And in isolation, a single raised voice in a generally warm, secure relationship is not going to cause lasting harm. Children are resilient. Relationships can hold imperfection. Repair is possible, and actually, repair is powerful. We'll come back to that. But when yelling is a pattern, when a child's nervous system is regularly activated, regularly flooded with stress hormones, regularly receiving the message that the people they love are unpredictable and sometimes frightening, the accumulation is what changes the brain. Think of it like water and stone. One drop of water landing on stone does nothing, but water, falling in the same place, again and again, over time, it carves the stone. It reshapes it. A child's developing brain is far more malleable than stone. And the experiences that happen again and again in the places where they feel safest, with the people they love most, those experiences are the water. And here's something that I find both sobering and deeply important. Children's bodies keep track even when their minds don't. Research in the field of developmental psychology, including the groundbreaking ACE study, the Adverse Childhood Experiences study, showed us that early childhood stress doesn't just affect behavior. It affects physical health, immune function, stress hormone regulation, sleep architecture. The long-term ripple effects of a chronically activated stress response in childhood show up in the body, sometimes decades later. This is not meant to terrify you. I want to be very clear about that. I am sharing this because knowledge is power, and the parent who understands the stakes will find the motivation to change far more readily than the parent who is just told to use a calm voice without knowing why. So let's talk about why. Let's talk about the brain. Let's talk about what actually works. And before I do, I want to pause here and ask you something, genuinely. Has your child ever done something in response to being yelled at, gone very still, or screamed back, or just looked through you with those empty eyes? and you felt in your gut that something was wrong, even if you couldn't name it? Write it in the comments. I would genuinely love to read it. Because the stories parents share in these spaces are how we all learn from each other, and you might say something that helps a parent on the other side of the world feel less alone. Now, what do we do instead? Because that's the question that matters. Understanding the problem is only half of it. The other half is the practice. The daily, imperfect, sometimes exhausting practice of doing things differently. And I want to start here with something that might surprise you. The goal is not to never feel anger. Anger is a healthy emotion. It is information. It tells us that something matters to us, that a boundary has been crossed, that we are overwhelmed or disrespected or at the limit of our capacity. Anger is not the enemy. The goal is to create a gap, even a tiny gap, between feeling the anger and acting from the anger. Because it is in that gap that parenting lives. That is where you can choose a response instead of just having a reaction. Let's talk about the window of tolerance. This is a concept developed by Dr. Dan Siegel, and it has genuinely changed the way I work with families. The window of tolerance is the zone in which a person, child, or adult can function, feel, think, and connect. Inside the window, you are regulated. You can hear. You can learn. You can be curious and open and available. Outside the window, above it in a state of hyperarousal, or below it in shutdown, you cannot. You simply cannot access your best self. Your thinking brain is not fully online. You are in survival mode. And here is the key insight. You cannot co-regulate a child's nervous system from outside your own window of tolerance. What that means practically is this. If you are trying to parent from a place of overwhelm, from exhaustion, from accumulated stress, from your own activated amygdala, you cannot give your child what they need in that moment, no matter how much you love them. Your nervous system is the model. Children's nervous systems literally take cues from the adults around them. This is called co-regulation, and it is not a metaphor. It is a neurobiological reality. Children's brains are wired to sync with their caregivers' nervous systems. When your nervous system is calm, your child's nervous system has a template to sync to. When your nervous system is activated, sharp, tight, loud, your child's nervous system activates in response. It mirrors. It escalates. It floods. So the first and most important tool is this. Before you can regulate your child, you have to regulate yourself. That is not a passive instruction. That is a practice. Here is what it looks like in real life. You feel it building. That heat in the chest, the tightening in the jaw, the thought, I cannot do this for one more second. That is the moment. Not to speak, not yet. That is the moment to do something physiological, because the nervous system is a body system, and it responds to body interventions faster than it responds to thoughts. One that works. A long, slow exhale. Not just a deep breath in. The exhale is what activates the parasympathetic nervous system, the rest and digest system that brings you back online. Make the exhale longer than the inhale. Do it once. Do it twice. Give your prefrontal cortex a few seconds to come back. Another. Physical space. I need a moment, said calmly. Not as a threat, not as a punishment, just as a fact. I need a moment, and then I will come back to you. And then actually leaving the room for 60 seconds to let your body chemistry shift. I know what some of you are thinking. That's easier said than done. You don't know my child. You don't know how many times we've been through this. And you're right, I don't. But I know this. Every time you manage to create that gap, even imperfectly, even just barely, you are practicing. And practice is how the brain rewires, not willpower. Practice. Now let's talk about what to say when you do speak, because tone is only half of the equation. The words matter too. And in child psychology, we talk a lot about the difference between punishment-based communication and connection-based communication. Punishment-based communication, which includes yelling, shaming, threatening, comparing, triggers the threat response. We've established that. But it also does something more insidious. It damages the relational bridge between parent and child. And that relational bridge is the most powerful behavior change tool that exists. Research consistently shows that children behave better, cooperate more, and develop stronger self-regulation not when they fear their parents, but when they feel securely connected to them. This is the counterintuitive truth at the heart of modern child psychology. Warmth is not permissiveness. Gentleness is not weakness. Connection is not the absence of boundaries. You can hold a child completely accountable for their behavior while also holding their nervous system in safety. In fact, they need both. They need the boundary and the warmth simultaneously, because the boundary teaches them about the world and the warmth keeps them open to learning from you. Let me give you something concrete. Let's go back to a scenario. Your child has lied to you. Again. And you feel that familiar surge of frustration and hurt. What does connection-based communication actually look like in that moment? It might sound like this, said quietly, looking them in the eyes. I know something's going on. I'm not angry. I'm concerned. And I need you to know that you're always, always safer telling me the truth than hiding it from me. Whatever you've done, I love you before I hear it, and I'll love you after. Now. Does that feel unrealistic to you? Does it feel like you could never get those words out in that moment? That's okay. That's a completely honest response, and I want to honor it. Because the version of you that can say those words calmly doesn't appear fully formed. That version is built over time, through practice and self-awareness and, this is important, through repairing the moments when you don't get it right. Repair. I want to talk about repair because I genuinely believe it is one of the most underrated tools in all of parenting, and research backs this up completely. Dr. John Gottman's work on relationships showed us that it is not the absence of conflict that makes a relationship healthy. It is the presence of repair, the ability to come back after a rupture, to acknowledge what happened, to reconnect. And this applies profoundly to parent-child relationships. When you yell at your child and then come back, when you sit beside them later and say, I'm sorry I raised my voice at you, that wasn't fair. I was overwhelmed and I took it out on you, and you didn't deserve that. You are doing something extraordinary. You are not just repairing the relationship, you are modeling. You are showing your child that adults can be wrong and accountable, that making a mistake doesn't mean you're bad, that love is big enough to hold imperfection and still come back. And here's the neurological miracle inside the repair moment. The stress response that was activated in your child's brain during the yelling begins to downregulate during the repair. The nervous system gets the message. The danger has passed. The person who loves me is still here. I am still safe. Over time, when repair becomes a consistent pattern, it actually builds a child's resilience. It teaches them that rupture is not the end, that relationships can be hurt and then healed. That is one of the most valuable things you can teach a human being. But, and this is a significant but, repair doesn't undo the harm of chronic patterns. A single repair after a single incident is healing. Regular repair after regular yelling is better than no repair. But the goal must be to reduce the yelling, not just to repair it. Now let me talk about something that I think is missing from most parenting conversations, and that is the role of the parent's own nervous system history. Many parents find that yelling is their automatic response not just to stress, but to specific triggers. A child who won't listen. A child who talks back. A child who is ungrateful. A child who is struggling academically. And when I sit with parents and we explore these triggers carefully, what almost always emerges is a thread that leads back, not to the child, but to the parent's own childhood. The parent who cannot tolerate their child's ingratitude was perhaps never allowed to be ungrateful as a child, was perhaps expected to be grateful for things that weren't worth being grateful for. The parent who explodes when a child talks back was perhaps a child who could never talk back, could never question, could never have a voice. Our children are, sometimes, our teachers. They press on the places in us that were never healed. They bring forward the emotions we learned to bury. And sometimes what feels like anger at a child is actually grief. grief for the child we used to be, who never got what we are now trying to give. This is deep work, and it is not something that can be fully unwound in a conversation or a video or even a year of trying. But it is work worth beginning, because every layer of it that you peel back makes you more available to your child, more present, more free. I want to say something now to the parents who are watching this and feeling heavy, the parents who are recognizing themselves in the stories I've been telling, the ones who are doing the mental math of years and moments and wondering what the damage is, whether it's reversible, whether it's too late. It is not too late. That is not a platitude. That is neuroscience. The brain remains plastic throughout life, children's brains especially. The research on early adversity is also, powerfully, research on early recovery. When a child moves from a high-stress environment to a consistent, warm, responsive one, their brain changes. The stress circuits quiet. The attachment circuits strengthen. The window of tolerance widens. Language development catches up. Emotional regulation improves. Behavior shifts. Children are not fragile in the way we sometimes fear. They are resilient in ways that should fill us with awe. But they need the conditions for that resilience to flourish: safety, consistency, warmth, and a caregiver who is doing their own work. You doing this work, watching this, thinking about this, being willing to sit with discomfort, that is the beginning of those conditions. Let me share one more story before we get to the end. A teacher named Diane told me about a student she had, a 9-year-old boy who spent most of the school year being disruptive. Loud, defiant, constantly seeking negative attention. She had tried everything. She had raised her voice, had sent him to the principal, had called his mother more times than she could count. Then she attended a professional development workshop on trauma-informed teaching, and she came back with one small change. Every single morning when that boy walked through the door, she greeted him first, by name, with warmth. "Hey, I'm glad you're here today." That was it. Nothing extra. No strategies, no reward charts. Just, "I see you. I'm glad you're here." Within 4 weeks, his behavior had shifted significantly. Not perfectly, but significantly. When she asked him about it months later, gently, in that careful way good teachers ask, he said, "When you say that, I feel like I want to be good for you." He didn't want to be good because he was afraid. He wanted to be good because he felt seen. This is the core truth of everything I've shared with you today. Children do not thrive because they are afraid of consequences. They thrive because they feel connected, seen, and safe. The brain that feels safe is the brain that can learn. The brain that feels seen is the brain that wants to grow. The brain that feels loved, not in the abstract, not just in words, but in daily, moment-to-moment, "I see you" love, that brain becomes something extraordinary. So what do we do instead of yelling? We build safety. We build connection. We do our own healing. We repair when we fall short. We show up, imperfectly, again and again and again. We learn about the brains in our care. We ask ourselves before we speak, is what I'm about to say going to open them up or shut them down? And we choose, as often as we can, to open. Not every time. Nobody every time. But more times. And then more times still. And here is something I want to leave you with. A thought that I return to often when I am working with families, when I am doing my own work, when I am sitting with the weight of how much it matters, how much we matter to the small people who need us. No child has ever looked back on their childhood and said, "I wish my parents had yelled at me more." But I have sat with many adults who looked back and said, "I wish someone had seen me. I wish someone had stayed calm. I wish I had known that my feelings were safe to have." Be that person, not the perfect person. That person doesn't exist, but the person who tries, the person who learns, the person who comes back after the hard moment and says, "I love you, and I'm going to keep trying to be better." That is enough. That is more than enough. That is, in fact, everything. And before I go, I want to genuinely ask you, think about everything we've covered today, everything you felt watching this. Has your child ever gone quiet when you raised your voice, or screamed back, or looked at you with those eyes, and you now understand why in a way you didn't before? Has there been a moment you now see completely differently? Write it in the comments. Share it. Not just for me, but for every parent watching who needs to know they're not alone in this. Your story has weight. It has value. Put it there. And if this shifted something for you today, share it. With another parent, another teacher, another grandparent raising a grandchild on their own. Because the science we talked about today, the stories, the strategies, none of it does anything sitting on your screen. It does its work when it reaches the people who need it. The children in our lives are counting on us to understand them better, and every single one of us is capable of that understanding. Thank you for being here. Thank you for caring this much. Go be gentle with your child today, and be gentle with yourself too.